speak as if you were a Jedi.
I was.
I've never heard of you.
It was a really long time ago.
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and let's talk about the Acolyte episode 6. So last episode was the pure adrenaline rush, dump out all your action figures on the floor and play with them at the same time, while this episode was quieter and more introspective. Now I know the episode's going to be really divisive, so I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the theories, and later, with the help of our own Colton Ogburn and special guest Mike Mazzella. And later on, I want to especially talk about how our beloved Vernestra Rwoh might have been a secret Sith master all along.
What?
Or at the very least, I think she is being corrupted by the dark side. Now look, I am going to talk about what didn't work in this episode and all the things that I think may not be working with this show, but first, I want to be nice and talk about everything that is great here, and believe me, there is a lot to love. First of all, I love how this show is moving Star Wars away from member berries and the original trilogy characters. And you guys know me, you know that I love pointing at the screen when I see Luke Skywalker or Max Rebo, but in addition to that, I also want new stories, both with new characters, but I also want new types of stories, and we get that here with this franchise entering a new genre, sexy Star Wars.
If you're not gonna join me, I'd like to put my clothes back on.
I also thought this episode felt visually rich and distinct from other Star Wars Disney Plus shows. I've complained about this a lot, like apart from the stellar wirework fight in the first episode, the sets on this show have been kind of bland and, well, fake looking, like the forest on Kofar. But much of this episode was filmed on the shore of the Portuguese island Madeira. It immediately grounds us into a real time and place. It feels lived in, and it makes me more invested in this tension between Chimere and Osha. Even the ship felt like it was a large set instead of a single room. You know, like the dojo set on the Jedi shuttle on the show Ahsoka. Like all around, the practical effects on this show are great. And I also don't mind that there was no action in this episode. I feel like a show needs a cool down after something like this. This episode also gave us a chance to reset how we see the characters and then allow them to pivot to their final storylines. And you have to admit, the design of the Darth teeth mask is awesome, and that is why we designed this Teeth Jaws parody shirt for sale right now at our merch store, ScreenCrushMerch.com. We designed these shirts ourselves for you guys. We also have one of my personal new favorites, What About Droid Attack on Cookies? And this one has a special place in my heart, May 25th, 1977, the glorious day that all of this began. And we also have my response to haters on the internet, the ability to speak does not make you intelligent. This is of course in addition to the other great merch we have for sale at our store right now, like Somehow Palpatine Returned, Original Trilogy, Good Soldiers Follow Orders, and many, many more. Thanks for watching, the links for those are below. But guys, what I really loved about this episode is how it showed us the seduction of the dark side. I don't think we've ever seen this done well in Star Wars. Like in the prequels, Anakin's descent never felt natural or gradual. One minute he was saying, hey, I just want to save my wife. And the next minute he was killing children. He didn't so much descend to the dark side as much as he did fall and rise sharply several times. But Manny Jacinto shows us the literal and figurative seduction of the dark side. He appeals to Osha's ego and her need to belong. He preys on her weaknesses and makes some valid points.
The Jedi teach there's only one way to access the Force, and if you don't do it their way, it fades.
He's not a scarred, prune-faced testicle with eyes like Palpatine. He's a good-looking, soft-spoken man who is telling Osha what she's always wanted to hear. He tells her that she has a gift in the Force, and that the Jedi failed her. Like I pointed out in our Easter egg video, the dark side of the Force is seductive. It should be sexy, and it should feel like a way easier path to take.
But the easier, more seductive.
And I also love that, like any good mystery show, as soon as we get one answer, like who is the master, we get even deeper mysteries, like what the hell happened to the master's back.
You wanna know how I got these scars?
Now, I am worried about the mystery structure of this show. Sometimes when a show goes like all in on one mystery, it's at the expense of character development. But like I said, I'm going to talk about all the negative stuff and a lot of our Vernestra Rwoh theories later in the video. I would also be remiss here if I did not mention the amazing score by Michael Abels, who is becoming one of my favorite Star Wars composers. He's able to hit those adventurous high points we expect from Star Wars.
Because I failed!
But he's also able to tone it down and bring us into an atmosphere that is terrifying.
Give me a couple minutes.
I just gotta say, the most common complaint about this show is that it's breaking the lore and continuity because all of a sudden Ki-Adi-Mundi is like not 40 years old or whatever. I think this show does have its problems stemming from the limitations of a limited series streaming show, but the show actually excels at using established canon and lore. It draws from the Legends material, some super deep cuts that I never thought we would actually get to see in live action. I think we're gonna look back at this show like as a whole and see how so many pieces of the Skywalker saga fit together better because of the Acolyte. Now, like I said, that's all the good. I have some complaints that I'll talk about in just a bit. And we got this theory about Vernestra Rwoh that I think is good. I think they've been hinting at this all season. We're going to be able to go back and look at the clues and say, haha, the Master was not the real mystery of the show. The real mystery of the show was whatever the hell Vernestra Rwoh's been up to since the end of the High Republic books. But now, to talk about the good, the bad, and the theories, I've got a Murderer's Row here to talk to. We have Mike Mazzella and Colton Ogburn, our very own Colton Ogburn. So, Mike, you know, you haven't been on in a while. I definitely want to talk theories with you in just a second. But before we get to that, tell us, what did you actually think about this incredibly strange episode of television?
Not my favorite episode of the season, but a lot to like there. A lot of character development, good acting. I thought that really brought it home. Some weird character interactions that I would not have foreseen at the beginning of this season. But then again, I'm not batting 100 on predictions. Overall,
yeah,
I thought it was pretty decent. I think that it's maybe, I would have liked for this to be another exhilarating episode after the one that we just had, and to see them kind of build on that momentum as we finish out the last few episodes of this limited run. And I did think that this episode was like a little bit of a lull. I would have liked to get some more answers, just a couple of little tidbits just to keep us going into the next one. I would have liked to see more of it. Honestly, I think that's my biggest takeaway from it.
Yeah, I had the same thought. Before we get into the drawbacks, though, I want to just go back on what you said a little bit. And you mentioned specifically the acting. And so I'd like to know what performance really stuck out to you and why, because, you know, you're an actor. You know more about this as a craft than I do.
The character of Soul, and I apologize for not knowing the actor's name, Mr. Squid Games, guy from Squid Games. Amazing work in this episode, just fantastic. You can really see the torment and how torn he is over his broken relationship with Osha and May, but also, you know, this extreme loss that at this point in the Jedi Order has to be a rarity. I'm willing to bet that they very rarely lose any Jedi while they're out on a mission, let alone an entire team getting taken out at once, including a Padawan. So this is a really devastating blow for him and for his character. And I think that also maybe explains why he's not really with it when it comes to recognizing that the person that he's brought aboard his starship is not Osha, but is in fact May. And you see that in that scene where he's kind of breaking down, but also then you see the quick character shift towards the end when he does figure out that it's May and then decides to zip off into hyperspace. We don't know where yet, but I think a lot of peaks and valleys and ups and downs for that character in this episode. And I thought that was really great. And then also just the dramatic tension between Osha and Coral? Chimere. The stranger, the apothecary, as I've been calling him, that guy.
Yeah.
Weird relationship there kind of brewing, and something kind of antagonistic yet, you know, attractive between the two of them. And it does kind of, you know, reminds you a little bit of Rey and Kylo Ren and their kind of frenemy romance thing that they had going on.
Yeah, I you know, Joanna Robinson, friend of the channel, who is over at The Ringer, she called this show Horny Star Wars. And I was like, yeah, they might as well have called it Naked/Sex Cave for the episode title. And
it is zesty Star Wars for sure.
Yeah. Look, man, Star Wars can go into different arenas. It can be a spy thriller like we saw in Andor. Andor exists in the same universe as the High Republic. It's all canon. So why not give us our first like truly great Star Wars love/sex tension story? There's no reason why this galaxy far, far away can't bring us to that. Colton, I know you've got complaints about the episode. You're not happy about it. But before we get into being meanies on the internet, what did you like about the episode?
Yeah, not good, Bob. But yeah, I did have a few good things to say about the episode and really the series overall. I like that they are showing us that the Jedi are not the good guys. And you'll hear a lot of, I call them whiners on the internet who, they claim to love the prequels and, oh, we know exactly what George Lucas wanted and Disney's not doing it. Look, the Jedi have never been like these pure, good, unflawed heroes. In the original trilogy, we saw Obi-Wan and Yoda both lie to Luke, manipulate Luke, deceive Luke, and try to, they hid the fact that Vader was his father. They hid the fact that Leia was his sister. They were training him up to be this warrior to destroy the Sith without sharing the truth with him. They covered all that up. And then again in the prequels, Lucas made it to where the Jedi covered tons of things up. And his entire point, and you can hear this, there's that line in The Last Jedi where Luke talks about hubris. That's not a sequel trilogy only thing, though. George Lucas has talked about the hubris of the Jedi and their own arrogance leading to their failures. And I would also argue the Jedi within the Clone Wars and within the prequels, they were never good. A lot of them were war criminals. They tried to pretend, oh, we're guardians of peace and we keep the peace. No, they became soldiers. They became warriors.
You're right. By the way, you're not just being hyperbolic. Pong Krell in the Clone Wars was seduced by the dark side and became a literal war criminal. He sent clones to die, and he was fragged by his officers. Go ahead. Sorry.
They deceived the Senate. They lied. I mean, Chancellor Palpatine was, running the thing, so they were probably right to do that. But they didn't know that. They thought they were just deceiving the Republic because they didn't want their power questioned. So I say all this because this isn't a new thing. This has always been the Jedi's thing, and I love that Acolyte is setting up and showing us cover-ups. We're seeing that with Sol and Vernestra. We're seeing we're seeing that hubris. We are seeing that arrogance. They don't want to tell the High Council. They obviously hid whatever happened that night at the Witch Coven from the High Council, Sol and all of them. There's obviously something that is Vernestra's her name, right? Am I saying that right?
Yes,
that she's covering. She's covering something up. So I think that what they are doing with this series, and yes, I do have complaints about this episode and a thumbs up, thumbs down world. I had complaints about other episodes as well, but for all of those, if I had to thumb up or thumb down, I'd give those thumbs up. This is my first episode where I was like, thumbs down. I wasn't digging it. We'll get into that. But I think the series as a whole is perfectly setting up the Phantom Menace, the prequels, and we are going to see how they went from the High Republic era, which is when the Jedi were in their prime. Really, the prequels, that wasn't the Jedi in their prime. That was the tail end. We're out of the High Republic era, and they're going down. They're about to go extinct. So it makes sense that this show that takes place at the end of this era would show us that downfall. So I appreciate it for that.
Colton Ogburn, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't come out with two guns ablazing, comes out with a Gatling gun against a lot of the criticisms on this show. I want to touch on something before we get into the negativity. Mike, Colton, you and we're all like politically attuned people. And Mike, I'm not sure with you, but Colton and I have talked in the past about how everybody complains about politics in Star Wars. I love politics in Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
I loved it. Oh, I loved it in the Bad Batch.
The diplomacy that leads to the wars.
Exactly. And when, it was my favorite episodes of Clone Wars were the ones about banking and finance, when Grand Moff Tarkin walked into the Death Star meeting room and it gave that small hint of politics. I wanted more. And in this episode, Colton, we get this moment that perfectly sets up what you're talking about. We see Vernestra Rwoh playing politics. In the High Republic books, the Jedi are involved with politics. They work very closely with the Chancellor, but they're not subservient to it. And I always thought, if you want to know the most damning line about the Jedi in the prequels, it is when Obi-Wan says to Anakin, I serve democracy, not I serve the Force. I serve democracy. So we're seeing how they became embroiled in petty Republic politics instead of being concerned with more spiritual matters. And I love that we're seeing aspects of Star Wars from a different point of view. Now, that being said, Mike, you want to get into some of the things maybe that didn't quite hit for you in this episode?
Yeah. I always wanted to see the Parent Trap in space, but now that I have seen it, did not necessarily live up to my expectations. I don't want to hate on it too much. Like I said, I think I agree with Colton. Overall, I like this series, and I like that they're taking a big swing here by doing a story that is set in a totally different time from everything else that we have seen before, and does provide a lot of just historical context for the Star Wars world that we've come to love. But this episode, I think, was a little bit of a letdown. Last episode was fantastic. All of the action, all of the excitement, a lot of high emotion. And then this episode was more about reflection. And that's not bad necessarily. But like I said earlier, I think they could have rode that momentum and had maybe 10 more minutes, end this episode on a bigger cliffhanger than just Osha putting on the helmet. Give us a little bit something more about what Vernestra is getting into, or what her connection to all of this is. I mean, I understand, she is in charge of Soul's Jedi unit, and she's the commanding officer, and that's why she's involved. But really, why is she in this story? What is her connection to this story? Why is she insisting on coming down to Kofar to investigate personally? Why does she want to seemingly distract Soul or not give him permission to go and seek out some of these answers, or to pull on that thread? And then meanwhile, she is trying to keep the Senate off of their backs, because obviously the Jedi don't want to be commandeered by the Senate. Obviously, we know that is going to happen. But what was the big inciting incident that finally rallies all 1,000+ members of the Senate to vote that they need to essentially take over the Jedi Order and deputize them as an arm of the Galactic Republic? What was it that set that off? And it might be just a huge, very egregious overreach by some overzealous Jedis that are not pious, not devout, and are just kind of doing whatever they like. And I think that we've seen that a lot in Soul's character, and then we also saw it in Vernestra this episode. I was
about to say, definitely, she's acting without she's not reporting to the higher up. Yeah. Well, I want to go back and just touch on something you said. You said, you wanted more in the episode, and like I said earlier, I agree. I think this goes back to what I've said about the show from the start. It needs not just longer runtime, but within that longer runtime, more time with characters, more time to show other plot lines. You're going to take this Senate storyline and reduce it to one hologram. We could have had a whole other character dealing with that, alongside Vernestra Rwoh. We could have had this character be a person who is somebody for Vernestra Rwoh to talk to define what she wants. Jackie Lon, RIP, had a few things where she's talking to Osha and she seems very pious, but we don't get a sense of what people want. We don't get a sense like maybe they're going to this planet and they're like, well, if we're going to go to this planet, there's one tracker we have to get. And then you could have an episode or more runtime dedicated to them finding Basil on some other planet where they run into some rogues, like a TV show, like a real TV show instead of a movie that's been cut up into sections. But like I said, I have a lot of things I can complain about, but I don't want to take away from you guys too much. Colton, take it away, my friend. What didn't you like about this episode?
Yeah, like you said, it's like a movie that's been chopped up into episodes, and it's a movie that has not been properly cut. The fat hasn't been trimmed out from the cut. I cannot stand the pacing of this episode. It got better, I think, in the second half, but I cannot stand the jumping back and forth between the island that they're on and the ship. And it's just these tiny little 2-minute scenes, and then it jumps over, and then it jumps back, and then it jumps over, and then it jumps back. I'm like, can we experience what's going on with these characters for a little bit and get invested and understand? I felt like the second I was starting to be like, oh, okay, this dynamic's interesting, they jump back over to the other thing. The pacing is awful. I thought the dialogue was awful. I hate to. I thought it was delivered horrible. I thought it was stale. I thought the acting was stale. I was not impressed, except for with Soul. Yeah, Soul delivers well. This show this entire show to me, even the episodes I like, the production to me just feels rushed, and I don't understand. It's a Star Wars show. I don't know why, AMC can make a 16 episode masterpiece 5 years in a row with Breaking Bad, and each episode's like an hour long, but Star Wars can't do it for a 8-episode series. I just don't understand that at all. And here, I'm going to reference my notes. I have a few more complaints. I didn't like the sexual tension between Chimere and Osha. I'm all for sexual. Yeah, I'm all for sexual tension in Star Wars. I thought Andor handled it very well. I think the original trilogy handled it well with Han and Leia, but it just felt weird when he said, "If you're not going to join me, let me get." That just felt so not Star Wars to me. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a prude. Yeah, it gave me the ick. Yeah, and I'm not a prude. It just, I don't know. It just felt out of place and weird. And I know that she's of age, but she just seems like too young character for that. I don't know. It just made me uncomfortable and not in a good way. I do like your point, Ryan, that he is literally seducing her. That is cool. But for me, it just felt like they were trying to appeal to like this, I don't know, like I'm not, shaming anybody, but it felt like these fanfic, smutty type stories. I felt like they were trying to appeal to that audience. And I just don't know that that's what Star Wars needs.
What's funny? As soon as you said that, I thought, let me check this out. So I Googled Chimere Osha AO3 and my computer's about to crash because it's loading up so many results from the search. Yeah. Again, Mike, before we were rolling, you were asking like, well, how old is Osha? And I think she's in her 20s. I mean, Amanda Stenberg is definitely of age.
I don't think they've established that, and that's why I was really uncomfortable at the start of that scene, because for whatever reason, I've been thinking this whole time that May and Osha are like 17 years old, and like Chimere's clearly like mid-30s at least, but likely hundreds of years old.
I think Chimere is mid-hundreds, but like I said, we'll talk theories in a little bit. This guy's actually, okay, sure, creepy Sith Lord. Grooming Sith Lord, maybe. Yeah, but you guys
also not totally sure he didn't
best damn
try
villain
this.
Star Wars has introduced in so long. Like, this guy is so well performed. He's so mysterious. He looks so cool. And let's face it, with the Star Wars bad guy, looking cool is like 80% of it. I'm really into that storyline.
I'm sorry, I completely decide. I do not like the Chimere character. I am not digging the performance, and no disrespect to that actor at all. But me personally, I'm just not digging it. I think it comes off, if he came off unsettling in a good way, that's good. I think it's just unsettling in this is uncomfortable. I don't like it. I think the dialogue is clunky. That's not his fault, but I have to disagree there. I'm not impressed with this villain.
And this is one thing I think goes back to the show's flaw. This is the kind of thing where we're seeing his performance, right? This like kind of chill guy coming off as very relatable. Speaking Sith Lord. He's a chill Sith. He's speaking about the Sith tenets in a way that seems it's almost like he's normalizing like evil politics here. He's like, emotion, passion. He's not saying, he said, the fear and the anger, but he didn't say hate at the end, which is the end of that Yoda line. We talked about that in our Easter egg video. The problem is we don't know where this is leading in the story. And when you have episodes this short and episodes this truncated that don't actually tell, this is not a full episode of television. This is like one of those moving the pieces around the chessboard. Nobody has a complete arc. This is half an episode of TV. We may, by the episode 8, go, yes, that made total sense. Of course he came off as creepy. And he should be coming off as creepy because he is a Sith Lord. I like that he's making sense right now, because I think by episode 8, this guy's going to be trying to pull the energy of May and Osha and vampire it for himself. I think he's supposed to be a creepy dude, but we're supposed to kind of think, he seems nice, or, I'm attracted to him, or whatever level we're hitting it. It's hitting you on that way. I don't think your instinct... It's like people who watched Wolf of Wall Street and thought, well, that's disgusting. Well, it's also the point. Maybe you're more attuned to that than I was, Colton.
I was just going to say, I do like this Sith Lord for the simple fact that I think this is not since Palpatine, but then even, after Palpatine's revealed, he gets, really aggressive. We don't see many Sith Lords that don't just rely on brute strength or like power in the Force. And I think that Chimere's main weapon is manipulation. Like, he's very good at playing a role and playing a character, and maybe he's, rolling the dice and taking different approaches with each one of them. With May, he fed into her anger and her hate, and he probably fanned those flames. Now he's trying to achieve the same goal with Osha, presumably, that he's trying to turn her. And instead of fanning hate and anger because he knows that that's what she's been trained against. He's saying to her, yeah, but you love, right? You've got a really big compassion and you've got a big heart. And the Jedi don't really like love, do they? You know, the attachment to things is not a good thing for them. Even earlier on the ship, because we're jumping back and forth so much, when Sol was talking to May, thinking that it's Osha, he remarks to her about how attached she is to Pip. And he's like, it's just it's a droid. It doesn't have a soul. So why do you? Sol's really concerned about those souls. And he doesn't like that she has this strong emotional attachment to what he basically essentially sees as like an inanimate object. So I think Chimere's strategy with Osha as opposed to May is play up how much she loves things and how that can be powerful too, because love and hate, two sides of the same coin, baby.
And you're right. And we mentioned this in the Easter egg video, but seduction is the power of the Sith. Palpatine seduced the Republic into following him. He seduced Anakin. We rarely see the Sith actually conquer through brute force. It's always through just tempting people. Go ahead, Colton.
I think Mike is making a great point there, because we see the same thing in the prequels with Anakin. Anakin is very attached to R2 and even 3PO, whereas I think Obi-Wan, who's your more traditional Jedi, maybe even Yoda, they don't seem attached to. They view them as they're the droid. They're doing their task, whereas Anakin seemed more emotionally connected to him. So I think that's a great point to show how the Jedi, like Soul, view it as a machine, whereas even a bad guy like Anakin, becomes Vader. He went that way because he is more vulnerable to his attachments. He has more emotion. So I think that was a great point by Mike. Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. Yeah. And he does, especially if you watch the Clone Wars, that Anakin gets like super attached to R2-D2 and places like missions, and rather than wipe R2's memory, he'll like he'll go get him and retrieve him because he has such an attachment to the droid. So now I want to talk about the theories that stem from this episode, guys, because we all agree it was a slow burn. There were a lot of things that we wish could have been in it, but let's go through some of the remaining mysteries in here. I still think for sure that definitely Darth Plagueis, right, is going to come into play. Mike, we get this hint that he's very old. He says, I was a Jedi a long time ago. I haven't heard of you a very long time ago. And in our Easter egg video, I said he might have used midichlorians to elongate his life. Do you guys think that he's Plagueis at this point? Is that line enough for you to think that? And he also says, I want the power of 2. Is he looking for the Force dyad? Talk to me, Star Wars experts.
The power of 2, it could be in reference to a Force dyad, but also, the Sith. There's always a master and apprentice, no more, no less. That, I think, power of 2 right there. I've said from the jump, from episode 3, I think we are seeing the origins, and we are finally getting backstory on that Darth Plagueis the Wise tale that Palpatine told. We are learning about Force dyads. We are learning about being able to create life using by manipulating midichlorians. We are learning about Force heal and preventing the people you love from dying. I think we are learning about all of that here. I don't know if Chimere is Plagueis. I caught that as well about him saying he's really old, and I was like, well, Vernestra, how old is she? Like to 150?
She would probably be about 150, I think. She was 15. They adjusted the timeline slightly, so I'm not 100% sure. She could be closer to 200 at this point.
Could that explain where he got the cortosis to make the helmet? It's maybe still laying around from...
Well, it's from his layer. Like you can see it in the side.
Is he literally just like stripping it off of the walls? I didn't catch that.
Yeah. Well, she looks up and sees a vein of it there, which there's this other, we talked about this in the Easter egg video, but there's this other planet from Legends that probably means they're on, but it doesn't matter.
And I think that planet and Octo, I think they're going to make that planet Octo. I think they're going to be the same.
Yeah,
planet.
me
the
too.
Planet
Me too,
yeah. Anyway,
we talked about that.
Well, and speaking of Octo, I think Octo, as we saw in Last Jedi, we saw with the what was the name of the Prime Jedi, that Sith hole. I think all of this is tying together, and that's one thing that I have complaints of Disney Star Wars, but I think that they have done a wonderful job at connecting these various eras. So to get to your question on Plagueis, is he Plagueis? I don't know. I would be totally fine with them switching Plagueis's species. I know he's like immune in Legends.
Legends, right?
Yeah, the internet would explode if they change it, but I think it's fine. But I also
kind of cares. Yeah, these guys. Keep your book. Your book still exists. It's still a good read. We can change
I
things.
also think, though, it would kind of be cool if at the end we meet like an actual Sith, because I don't know that Chimera is an actual Sith, and you know you can get
Might
into
not
a philosophical discussion of, oh well, what is an actual Sith? I guess it's if you consider yourself to be one, blah blah blah. But I think it would be cool if he is like discounted by the actual Sith Lord that may be a Plagueis, may be a Tenebris. And that could lead into Chimera perhaps being the one who started the Knights of Ren, Kylo Ren. We've heard the themes of the Knights of Ren in this. So I think this could be a Knights of Ren type origin, but I've got on long enough. I'm anxious to hear Mike's theory.
The Knights of Ren is also a really interesting section of this. So, Mike, I think the big mystery from this is Vernestra, right? She's hiding something. It's pretty obvious. She's hiding the truth or about maybe Brendock, maybe something else. You also can't ignore, as many of our wonderful viewers have pointed out to us on Twitter, that the marks on his back look like whip scars, and she has that famous light whip that she created during the Nihil War. Where do you think Vernestra's connection might be to?
Well, I think that she was most likely Chimera's master when he was a Padawan learner. Like, this is the episode where we learned that he used to be a Jedi, that he's not just some guy who was super attuned with the Force and just stumbled into becoming a Sith, but that he was actually formally trained. Although his fighting style is very different and they think it's erratic and everything, he was at one point a Jedi. So I think it's very possible, not likely, that Vernestra was his master and that something went wrong there. The line that she says, something to tip the scales,
she
like,
recognized what was immediately had happened in that forest. You're right.
Right.
And that's what she said.
The way that she said it, though, it sounded to me like she was recounting like a prophecy or something that she had heard before, or something cryptic that someone had told her, and that for years she's been trying to figure out what they meant, and that now she's just figured out this is what they were talking about. The way that she repeated it, just the line delivery there, sounded to me like it was a realization and it had just been brought back up in her consciousness.
To your point on that, tipping the scales, in the Plagueis novel, it's Legends now, but we learned, Plagueis's plan was to tip the Force to the dark side, and so that could kind of be what she's learning, like the overall Force within the galaxy. Plagueis's goal was to, with Palpatine, shift the scales, over to the dark side of the Force.
Well,
so, yeah, I think there's a point there.
And this is where I want to tie both of those things together and say Vernestra maybe wasn't his Jedi master, maybe she was his Sith master. Last week I threw out a theory that however the High Republic novels end, the main thing is that Marchion Ro is not killed by a Jedi, he's killed by a secret Sith, maybe even somebody who's posing as a Jedi. Now, Vernestra Rwoh, not a main character in this series, but we could see the High Republic books end with her being tempted to the dark side, maybe not being that, maybe one of the Jedi is already a secret Sith Lord who kills Marchion Ro, and then she comes to join him. I just think it would be a twist within a twist to show that, hey, something has happened between her being this idealistic 15-year-old youngest Jedi Knight of all time prodigy to how she became this hardened secret Sith Lord. And that would also explain why she's so secretive, why she's not reporting to the council, why she's getting involved in politics. Because if the Sith have a master plan that outlives their lifespans, that master plan would be, we need to take over the Republic. We do that through controlling the politics, because that's the Jedi.
See, I thought her thing there would be, I want to keep the Senate out of here so that they don't discover what I'm doing. And that maybe then later on, it was somebody like Palpatine who decided, you know what, actually, we can bend them to our will and get them to aid our causes.
Or she does something so bad, so secretive, that then it's discovered accidentally and it forces the Senate to get involved. I really hope the show, 2 episodes left? I hope the show in the next 2 episodes, as easy as it is to write an Easter egg video for 32 minutes, I really hope that we get some length and some depth. And if there are these machinations and schemes within schemes, that we see those play out. The thing about a mystery show like this is, when you put all your chips on the mystery, if the answer to the mystery isn't satisfying, then the show's not satisfying, because they're just not giving me enough of that sweet, sweet character exploration that I want, especially in a Star Wars show.
Twist for twist's sake is never good. No.
Well, guys, that's a lot to think about, especially the part about Vernestra maybe being a Sith Lord. And of course, I want to hear from everybody in the comments, but I think the people watching might want to talk to you guys directly on your socials and tell you just how wrong you are. Mike, where can the people find you?
If you want to tell me just how wrong I am, you can find me at Mike M Comedy on Instagram.
And Colton, what about you?
Oh, you can find me here on ScreenCrush, and yeah, then of course on Twitter at Colton Ogburn.
Yeah, and Colton's a good follow for both his videos here and his Twitter. So thank you guys very much for joining me. And I want to remind you guys, we have new merch in our merch store down below. We have a 15% off sale that I think ends today. And of course, if it's your first time at the channel, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts, and let us know what you think about all this down in the comments below. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.